property. Therefore, he can do what he wishes with her and do what he wants to her. Violence in families is one of those gray areas that many churches don't know how to address, nor do we know how many people within congregations have been impacted by it. October is the month set aside to highlight the presence and prevalence of domestic violence in America. What is domestic violence? It is a pattern of behavior in any relationship that is used to gain or maintain power and control over an intimate partner. People who live in these kinds of relationships don't feel that they can ever get out of that relationship. The abuse can be physical, it can be verbal, it can be sexual, it can be emotional, psychological, it can be economic. The violence includes any behaviors that frighten and intimidate or terrorize or manipulate, hurt, humiliate, violate, blame, injure, wound, and in some cases even kill. Abusers want to keep their victims living and walking on eggshells. Domestic violence can happen to anyone of any race, any age, any sexual orientation. Doesn't matter whether you are religious or an atheist. It can happen of any gender. It can happen to couples who are married and they look like they are so happy, but beneath the veneer are years of brutality and trauma. It can happen in relationships where people are living together and the woman is forced to carry the load. The abuser may not even have a job, but he feels like he's doing you a favor because there's a man in the house. It can occur in relationships where people are just dating and there are these little love taps and it's just viewed as nothing serious. It can happen in same-sex relationships where one lover is beating the lights out of the other person and somehow or another it just goes on and on and on. I want to say, young ladies, young men, don't be blindsided by those little love taps. They merely disguise the real anger just below the surface. Young ladies, if you're dating a young man and he likes to hit on you or call you names, that's a relationship you need to quickly bring it into. I wish I had things. Well, look. Things will never get better, they only get worse. You know, sometimes people say, well, you know, once you get married, it'll get better. No, it just turns into a bigger nightmare. I say again, domestic violence affects people of all socioeconomic, economic backgrounds and educational levels. The majority of domestic violence victims are women and children, and in some cases, as we saw in the film clip from The Color Purple, they can be men. 1 in 3 women report being physically or sexually abused by a husband, a father, a boyfriend, an uncle, a grandfather, an old friend that lives in the community at some point during their lives. More than 32 million Americans are affected by domestic violence each year. That's nearly 1/5 of the American population. That shows you how widespread this thing is. Domestic violence is the leading cause of injury to women, and within all congregations there are people who have been victims of some form of abuse and hatred. And to be sure, domestic violence is one of those more silent taboos among Christians. You know, we don't like to talk about domestic violence. We don't like to talk about sex. We don't like to talk about just a whole range of things. We just kind of just leave that, just talk about Jesus and going to heaven and everything will be all right. Just set me on the road to my destiny and I'm going to be okay. But don't deal with the issues that's really impacting my lives. And just as there are families and situations outside of local congregations, there are tens of thousands, yea, hundreds of thousands who have been victimized at home, at church, in work, in school, and in other places where they should be safe, and they show up in congregations week after week, bearing the pain, carrying the stigma, suffering from the heartache that has surrounded their life, and they really don't know how to say, this is where I am. I am going through some stuff. Behind my smiling face, there is a heart that is bleeding with pain. And you know, we cannot and must not shy away from speaking about matters that impact the lives of people, especially when there are parallels in the Word of God. Family violence was present in the very first family, because Cain killed Abel because he was mad at God because God accepted his brother's offering and told him that there was something about his that he didn't like. This sinful scourge can happen even among God's greatest saints. I wish I had just a couple of people who could say, okay, Pastor, I think you might have something to say to me today that just might help me get through some stuff. David, you remember King David, don't you? He was the man that danced before the Lord with all of his might, danced out of his clothes. He was the guy that slew Goliath. He was the fella that God picked to be the second king of Israel. He was the one that God said is a man after my own heart. He was the one who loved God so much that he wrote many of the Psalms that we sang. He is the one who wrote, "The Lord is my life and my salvation." David, the king of Israel, had abusive and domestic violence among his own family. And the interesting thing is, he never addressed it. Can I go on just a little bit? Abuse and domestic violence reminds us that human nature is flawed. It is flawed, and no matter how much you're dressed up today, we're still flawed. So what do we learn about domestic violence in this story, Pastor? I came because it was Communion Sunday. I was hoping to hear a word about Jesus dying for my sins and maybe making my life straight, and then I get here and you're talking about domestic violence. I just can't seem to put all of this together. Well, you know, the video we showed of Jesus being crucified was a very violent act. And if you watch television this week, you're going to watch some violence. So, since we're all on the same page, and since, you know, when you watch it on Law and Order SVU, you know, they're going to solve the crime in an hour. Exactly 42 minutes, they're going to fix the problem. Find the suspect, arrest him, try him, figure out the DNA, and put him in prison. But that ain't how it works in real life. Can I go on? I want you to notice first that domestic violence and abuse occurs most often against those who are the most vulnerable. Tamar was the only daughter of King David. The only daughter. He had several sons, but he had one daughter. And the Bible gives us the notion that she was a very beautiful young lady. Her name means palm tree, and she was tall and gorgeous to look at. We don't know her age, but we can assume that she was the apple of her father's eye. And being his only daughter, he really, really cared about her. Now, David had a blended family. You know, he had about 4 or 5 wives, and all of those wives had some children, he had sons, and he had one son. His firstborn son was a fellow by the name of Amnon. Amnon. He was fascinated by his younger sister. He was in line to be the heir to the throne, but he had this sister that every time she walked by, he was probably fantasizing in his mind. And the record is that he raped her and discarded her as trash. You know, violence in families is more common than we admit. Who knows how many people will gather today who grew up in a climate of fear? Who knows how many of you are reliving some moments from your childhood right now, that when you were emotionally or physically brutalized by a mother or a father or a sibling or a neighbor or a relative or some other older adult. It should come as no surprise to you, brother man, why she has trouble loving you. It's because she was abused as a little girl. It should come as no surprise why he hates women. It's not because he really hates you. It's just that his mama called him names, and he watched his mother get beat up every weekend by her father. No wonder he doesn't like women. Sometimes, you know, violence starts in a home when the husband, who is agitated, just goes off about any little thing and starts blaming his wife or the children. The bread was cold. The greens were too salty. The children came home late. Why did you move the remote control? And this blame game can lead to verbal outrage and eventually physical abuse. It more often leads to psychological control, and abuse can occur in families where the innocent suffer. Just think now, when there are children involved and they are watching and hearing and listening to this loud talking and this cussing and this fussing and this throwing pots and pans and all of this kind of stuff, it leaves a mark in the heart of that child. Who knows how many babies are abused by somebody recommended to be a babysitter? Sometimes abuse starts with women who are overly jealous and who disdain every woman that their husband works with or that their boyfriend works with. You didn't call me 16 times today. What's up with you? We must be extremely careful that we do not put our children in a position where they can become victims of abuse. Are y'all still with me? May I go on just a little bit? So domestic violence and abuse occurs most often against the most vulnerable, whether it's a woman or a child, or it's someone who may be older and can't even help themselves. Who knows how many people are abused in nursing homes? Second, sometimes what looks like genuine love are the shadows of a looming heartbreak and endless nights of pain. You know, I met the nicest man. I've never met a man like that. Oh, he is just so wonderful. He's tall, he looks good, he speaks to me well, and we just hit it off, you know. We got it going together. Everything is fine. And one would think, you know, that sometimes people think that, you know, because he's good looking or she's good looking, that's going to protect her from abuse. But I tell you, it didn't help Rihanna. When Chris Brown went to throwing punches, all of her good looks got beat up. Amnon was frustrated. Bible says he was frustrated to the point of illness. He was sick on his bed.